What's up, everybody? It's Alan's Movie Talk, back at it again. Just got back from seeing Wolfman, so let's talk about it. So when it comes to Leigh Whannell, I am a huge fan of his work. Obviously, his career kickstarted in the original Saw, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, especially in the horror genre. And then as a writer, he has done some incredible work, pairing up with James Wan. And then in recent years, he has gone on to direct and write three of his own films, in Insidious 3, Upgrade, and Invisible Man. And I felt like he knocked it out of the park with all three of those films, especially his last one, Invisible Man. That's my favorite film of his, and I felt like was such a unique and refreshing take, and a refreshing modern take to do with these Universal monster characters. So when I heard that he was writing and directing this film, I was very excited. It was definitely one of my more anticipated films of this year. Um, but overall, I do feel like this film was a little bit of a disappointment for me, compared to his other three films. Now, overall, I would say that I am positive on the film. So I did kind of want to talk about some of those positives that I had with the film. I did feel like this film didn't have an overly complicated plot. It's a very straightforward story, and it limits the location to one location pretty much for the entire runtime of the film. And there isn't a lot of characters. There's only a few characters you could see from the preview. It is the dad of the family, and his wife and daughter. So it's a very limited and simple story. And honestly, I felt like in some ways that was actually pretty good, because it didn't allow for any of the plot to get overly complex, or out of control or anything. I also really did enjoy the fact that most of this film goes practical, with a lot of the effects, and in some aspects of the body horror. When you get kind of the grotesque scenes, they really went practical with most of it, and I felt like that made it very effective. I do feel like in the last year or two, especially when it comes to horror movies, that Hollywood has kind of started a little bit more of a trend of going more practical over CGI. Not always the case, but we've seen a little bit more of a shift. And I don't know who to thank for that. I tend to think maybe Terrifier, but I do like when horror goes practical, over digital effects. And this film did that, and it did it quite well. Like I said, with the body horror, there was definitely a few scenes in this film, during the transition scenes, where he's transitioning into the Wolfman. I felt like there was some very squeamish moments, that make it kind of go, ugh, so. And I feel like a lot of the practical effects had to do with that. So that was definitely an aspect of the film I enjoyed. And from a technical aspect, I really felt like the camera work in this film was done very well. Leigh Whannell's always had a strong vibe, with his camera work, where he basically lets you marinate in the scene and gives you a wide sense of the surrounding area that the characters are in. And then there was definitely a unique thing that they were doing with the camera work, where in this movie, the dad is transitioning into the wolf pretty consistently. It's not like a typical werewolf film where if the moon comes out they just instantly transfer. So it's happening slowly throughout the film, and what he does is he tends to switch the POVs, from the dad's POV to the wife and the daughter's POV. And when he does that, he kind of does a nice rotation, like where if they're both standing right here, it'll be right behind the dad or from the dad's POV, and then it'll kind of just rotate the camera to the other side of the room. And then you get from the wife's and the mom's POV, and I thought that was very interesting. On a technical aspect, how he did that with the camera work. And then also the sound design was really, really good. Throughout the whole movie, with him transitioning, the different noises that he would pick up on, especially in a movie theater, you just really you felt like you were there and in his head, and you got all the details and all the things he was picking up on. So I really felt like the sound effects and the sound design was done very well in this film. Then I kind of just talked about it. This is a very unique take on Wolfman. This film basically treats it more as a virus rather than a like, you know, a curse or some, So I don't really know the word I'm looking for. Where like I said, in other iterations, it's usually once there's a full moon, person just immediately transforms into the werewolf, whereas in this film it's kind of treated like a sickness and a virus, so that allows for a pretty much a slow transition that happens throughout the entire film, and I just felt like that was a unique take, and one that I felt like was a very big swing on Leigh Whannell's film, and what makes this film stand out from other previous iterations of werewolves. And I appreciate that he went and tried to do something bolder and newer. And also, too, the design of the Wolfman was unique. I know that technically the look of the Wolfman had leaked, months before, where they had the guy in the costume at Halloween Horror Nights. Definitely does not look as bad as that guy in the costume did. To me, the design worked for what they were going for in the film, where it was more of a virus and more of a sickness, rather than what we get in the normal traditional sense when it comes to werewolves. And then, too, on an acting sense, I don't really feel like anyone had a bad performance in the film, specifically the two leads. I'm struggling with their names. I can't really remember the characters' names, but, the mom and dad, husband and wife, whatever you want to say. I felt like acting-wise, they did a very good job, and there was really no discrepancies when it comes to the acting in the film. But to me, that is where my positives on the film end. Like I said, I was a very, very big fan of Invisible Man, and one of the reasons that film really worked for me was because of the fact that, they took these classical characters, like Invisible Man, and, put them in a more modern setting where the big theme of that film was about, domestic and spousal abuse and violence, and that played in really well with Invisible Man. This film tries to essentially do the theme and tackle, generational trauma, maybe a little bit, overbearing parents, generational trauma, really overbearing parents, and maybe a little bit more meaner parents who put curses onto their children by, kind of dooming them from being abusive or, too aggressive with them. But the problem I had with this film, with trying to explore those themes, is it doesn't really dive into them on anything more than a surface level. And then also, and that mostly happens in the first act of the film. And then pretty much, once we get into the point where the dad is infected and we're starting the transition for him to become the Wolfman, it kind of just gets dropped. And then we don't really bring it up ever again. So the movie concludes, and all those themes that they brought up are never really concluded in a satisfying way. So I found that to be highly disappointing, and something from a story and a script writing perspective that just didn't make much sense to me. And then to kind of piggyback off of that, it really just makes the characters in this film paper thin. I mean, the dad is the one that we get most, the most backstory and, really any type of story or characterization of. And then halfway through the movie, he starts to transition into Wolfman, and a lot of that stuff is never really brought up again or is dealt with in a proper way. And, like I said, halfway through the movie is when the transition starts to happen. So then we start to go more into the POV of the wife and the daughter, and we didn't really get any setup for the wife. We don't really know anything about her, except the fact that their marriage is on the rocks, and she's a journalist, I think. It was either a journalist or a writer. I can't really remember at this point. But that's really all we get on her. So when she is basically taking the lead of the film, once the dad starts to transition into Wolfman, we don't really care about her, right? And we don't really know anything about her. So, the characters in this film are very surface level. And that even honestly includes the dad. We really don't get a lot about him, but we just get a little bit more than we get about everybody else. So I felt like, the characters being paper thin just caused for me not to really care as much as I probably should have. So. And then earlier in the positive section, I did talk about how the story was, rather simplistic, rather straightforward. And in a sense, I did think that was, good for the film, because I didn't want it to get convoluted or super complex. But when you compare it to Leigh Whannell's previous work, it's just not nearly as smart. When you have films like Upgrade, like Insidious 3, like Invisible Man especially, there was a certain element to those films where they felt unpredictable, in certain, in the script writing. It felt like when you thought that you were going to know where the script and the story was going, he kind of turned that around and made it unpredictable, and that's what made his films so intriguing, especially in Invisible Man. I felt like that one just really did that so well. So from a story writing perspective, yeah, it's simple and it's a very straightforward plot, so it's not overly complicated. But when it's compared to his other work, which, it's kind of hard not to do, especially when you compare this one to Invisible Man, which same essentially category of characters, it just really comes up short, and to me that was very disappointing. This film also, to me, had way too many plot conveniences. There was a lot of moments in the film where the, smarts and the power of the Wolfman were constantly changing. There was one particular scene where it seemed like at this point the dad had fully transformed into the Wolfman. And then in the next scene, it seems like he's back to kind of being somewhat cognitive and knowing who the family is. So I felt like there was a lot of plot conveniences, and specifically when it comes to the power of the Wolfman and, at what stage in the transition we were with the Wolfman, to essentially allow certain scenes to happen and to play off without, the family or anyone else involved to be killed. And that was just kind of disappointing because it felt like they were changing the rules of what was happening as we went. So I didn't feel like the consistency in the writing, especially in that back half when we're really getting into the transition to Wolfman, was really all that great. So, and then because of the unique take on the Wolfman in this film, with it being more like a virus where he slowly is transitioning into the Wolfman, that did really cause the first half of this film to have a really slow build and almost uninteresting in that first half. And it really, to me, took its time a little bit too much getting to what we came for and getting to him becoming the Wolfman. So that, didn't, even though it was a unique take, and I appreciate that Leigh Whannell tried to, bring something new to this story and do something different, it caused the movie to be a little bit too slow in that first half for me. So, even though I appreciate and admire that he wanted to do something different, I feel like the execution of it didn't necessarily work for me. And then to kind of wrap things up, I did feel the body horror in this film was done pretty well. Like I said, there was definitely some scenes where, you felt a little squeamish, but the nature of the film being in one location for majority of the runtime, and there not being a whole crop of characters and a large ensemble cast in the film, did, it lacked in the kind of kills and carnage candy section of the film. Like I said, the transition and the body horror that came with that was done fantastically and done with practical effects, so I really appreciated that. But I would have liked to maybe had some more characters in the film so that way we could at least get a couple more kills in there. So, yeah, that part of it, too, was also a little bit disappointing for me. But overall, guys, I didn't really, dislike this film. I think overall I am positive on it. But for me, when you compare it to the very high bar that Leigh Whannell has set with his other work, writing and directing, this definitely feels like the weakest entry that he has done so far. And to me, that's going to always feel like a disappointment when I did have high expectations for this film. So on a rating scale, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5 stars. If you are a fan of Leigh Whannell and you are a fan of werewolf films, I'm still going to recommend that you go and check it out. And form your own opinion on it. But for me, I can't help but be disappointed by the film, even though I would probably still say I'm overall positive on it. So, all right, guys. Well, that is my review of Wolfman. I know this is kind of off subject, but with the U.S. ban of TikTok happening, I am planning on pretty much exclusively uploading on YouTube going forward. Format's going to change, as you can see in this video. No longer doing the vertical videos, going a little more horizontal. So, I make longer videos anyways as it is. So I feel like I'm more suited for the YouTube platform. So I'm going to continue posting on here and regularly doing reviews like I want to. So outside of that, everyone, if you saw Wolfman, go ahead and comment below. Let me know what you thought about it. And besides that, have a great night.